Today's World Insight with Tian Wei. The Taiwan leadership election 1 month away. What are the issues that will rally the polls in the final stretch? And the World Trade Organization in limbo. Former WTO chief Pascal Lamy weighs in on how to keep the multilateral trading system alive.
All will have to accept that the rules cannot be changed just in one direction or on one issue.
And here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. We begin today's show in Taiwan, where the local election is exactly 1 month away. The result will determine the future of cross-strait ties, a key part of culture, economy, and life on the island. Before we get down to the discussion with our panelists from the mainland and Taiwan, let's take a look at this first.
A race between Tsai Ing-wen and a mayor from the south, Han Kuo-yu. According to the latest polls, Tsai has an advantage over her opponent from the Kuomintang party, but her own Democratic Progressive Party may not retain majority of the legislative branches. The key issue dividing the two parties is their vision for moving the island further away or closer to Beijing. In contrast to Tsai's constant call to combat Chinese influence, Han says a cross-strait relationship is essential for peace, stability, and development. Despite receiving military backing from the United States, Taiwan receives no recognition in the United Nations. Since Tsai took office, 7 nations have abandoned ties with the island in favor of Beijing. Amid threats of global economic slowdown, the Chinese mainland continues to welcome Taiwan investments. Authorities in Beijing recently criticized Taiwan's DPP for its effort to incite hostility against the mainland and warned its interference in Hong Kong affairs will not succeed. Faced with geopolitical uncertainties and spurs of unrest around the world, voters in Taiwan have a lot to consider when they cast their ballots.
For more discussion on the Taiwan regional election, we are joined in Taipei by Joanna Lei, former legislator and chief executive officer of the Changhua 21st Century think tank. In New York, we have originally from China's mainland, Victor Gao Zhikai, vice president of the Center for China and Globalization. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to ask you, Ms. Lei, about the latest situation as the polls are suggesting there is a clear winner, but at this point, what is your analysis of the situations for the two candidates?
Well, certainly this year the general election is characterized by 3 factors. One is false news and unscientific polls. The second one is extensive cyber warfare, and the third one certainly is international intervention. So Han, as one of the candidates, have asked his supporters to not cooperate in any public opinion polls. In fact, he's asked people to answer that they would support Tsai Ing-wen in any calls given to any of his supporters. That is to take away the effect of the false polls, and therefore any poll number that you're seeing right now will not be a scientific representation of what the voters will really do come January 11th.
Now, given the circumstances, as you mentioned, Ms. Lei, what do you make of now till the election, which is exactly 1 month away? Apparently, there are a lot of things going on, a lot of conspiracy theories going on, and a lot of chaos going on right now, if I could use that word.
Which certainly is a word that is chosen by most people in Taiwan as the word characterizing 2019. I think during the next month there will be a lot of false news and a lot of political maneuver, and primarily there will be lots of street activities from both camps. Up to date, Han Kuo-yu's camp and his supporters are extremely strong in showing support in all mass rallies. As a result, Tsai Ing-wen has not held any major mass rally for her bid for the leadership. So we're looking at the next big rally from DPP, which will indicate how many people are passionate enough to come out of their comfort homes and come to the street to support Tsai Ing-wen. Right now, it seems to be a neck-to-neck race. It's not a foregone conclusion at all.
While you were speaking, Ms. Lei, we were playing out a footage of the character in Chinese, which is called luan, chaos. That is certainly being selected by the local media. If we could have that footage once again on the screen as the key word for this year, because the world is changing and certainly there are a lot of chaos going on in the Taiwan local election or leading to the local election. There we go. That is the Chinese character chaos. That certainly has been the key word many believe that could characterize what's going on in Taiwan for this year. Now, let me go to you, Mr. Gao. Obviously, the Chinese mainland authorities have been saying once and again that there needs to be a fair election in Taiwan. But given what Ms. Lei earlier mentioned, the three factors, mainly false polls, infiltration intervention from some of those other countries, and as well as cyber warfare, there's likely to be an unfair election. Mr. Gao, what do you make of the potential?
Yes, indeed. There is only 1 month before the local election in Taiwan. I was in Taiwan a couple of months ago, and I met quite a few local leaders over there. And my impression, and also my impression based on the most recent development, is that there is a lot of uncertainty in Taiwan about the upcoming election, mainly because a lot of confusion in the territory, and also there is a lot of challenge, I think, as to which direction should be the island should follow in terms of its economic development, and how to deal with its relations with mainland China. So I think this election will be very important, but right now we do not know which candidate will emerge as the leader. And I think this is very important because right now we also face a lot of challenges in Hong Kong, and it's very apparent that the United States government is interfering in the internal affairs of Taiwan more and more after enacting a law about Taiwan. So there will be a lot of uncertainties, and I think we need to follow the situation very closely. So long as the elections are fair and democratic, I think whatever outcome of the election, there will be no major change to the fact that Taiwan is part of China, and Taiwan need to handle its relations with mainland China in a very responsible way for the benefit of the people in Taiwan.
Ms. Lei, now, we all understand very well, back in the early 21st century, shall we say, during the George W. Bush administration, the status quo about the relations between Taiwan and the mainland, and also the status quo of relations between Taiwan and how the U.S. sees it, has been very much set. And that has been the principle Washington has been upholding, respecting the one China policy. Now, what do you make of all of the latest, the geopolitical changes going on in the Asia-Pacific region, and as a result of that, the ever-intense pressure coming from Washington regarding where the relation will be between the mainland and Taiwan? Of course, China is exercising sovereignty in this regard very firmly.
Well, certainly the question is extremely insightful, because there has been an established benchmark and status quo in terms of how U.S. will conduct its relationships with both mainland China and Taiwan, as well as how Taiwan and mainland China will conduct their bilateral discussions or relationship. However, during the Trump administration, a lot of those status quo, in your words, has been changed. So, you know, the only status quo is dynamic. U.S. has changed and have moved the bar from one end to another. We all recalled when U.S. severed the diplomatic tie with Taiwan and established its diplomatic tie with mainland China, which was during the 1978-79. But after 40 years, all of a sudden, it's turning a tipping point. It's now supporting Taiwan in terms of its vibrant democracy and humanitarian values. So as such, this current election is seen as a show of force, a show of camaraderie between Taiwan and the United States, and how Taiwan will play a pivotal role in the East Asia affairs. So we are seeing explicit, open, and strong intervention from the United States, even including the involvement of Oslo Forum as well as NED.
Very interesting what you have just mentioned, Mr. Gao. Now, one of the things that really reflects what Ms. Lei just mentioned is about the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan and the ever more mixing the relationship with all the latest development. Some are very negative from China's perspective between China and the United States. What do you make of all of these latest developments, and how do you think people from other parts of the world should understand some of the most important facts right now?
Well, first of all, it is indeed a fact that overall China-US relations are deteriorating. And it has been getting worse and worse over the past 2 years or so. And there is no expectation that China-US relations can immediately improve in the coming years. So in this overall deteriorating framework of China-US relations, it seems that Washington is very eager to look for leverage points in dealing with the People's Republic of China, and Taiwan comes very handily and very conveniently as a lever in U.S. applying more pressure against China. However, I don't think the United States can overplay its hand. Remember, 41 years ago, it was the United States that severed its relations with Taiwan, withdrew all the U.S. troops from Taiwan, and also rescinded the U.S.-Taiwan alliance treaty. So this is a very, very heavy stuff for the United States to do. I don't think anyone in Washington can reach a conclusion that by siding with Taiwan against China will serve the fundamental interest of the American people. No, it's not reaching that tipping point at all. So China-US relations will remain the most important relations, and leaders in Taiwan should really keep this very much in mind in navigating through this very turbulent and uncertain period of time.
Yeah, and Ms. Lei, of course, in a way, Taiwan has been used over and again as a bargaining chip by Washington toward Beijing. But how much do you think that will be reminded to the people in Taiwan when they look at what's going on right now on the island and the future of the island?
Well, certainly there is a very clear generational gap. The youngest cohorts, the young adults, 35 years old or under, have no historical recollection of what Mr. Gao just mentioned. Their relationship and their historical insights have been formed by the DPP, and right now Taiwan is playing a very strong hand by both implying and stating that the United States will support Taiwan, even in the face of a mainland China threat. So the young people has been siding even with some of the Hong Kong students and chanting on how Taiwan should resist any force or any coercion from mainland China and stay independent. And that, to me, is a very dangerous sign, because Taiwan neglected to tell the people the whole truth and neglected to tell them the entire history.
Well, on the other hand, it was the Taiwan authority that tried to accuse the mainland of quote-unquote meddling with the upcoming election. And Tsai Ing-wen said the Chinese mainland wants to force Taiwan to accept so-called One China, Two Systems policy by issuing the 26 measures. By the way, the 26 measures are issued by the mainland to encourage more exchanges between the mainland and Taiwan through business, academic, and social ties. Let's listen to now the response from the Taiwan Affairs Office of the State Council of China as to how they respond to the latest quote-unquote accusation.
首先呢，就是我们是从来呢都不介入台湾地区的选举。
First, we never interfered in the regional election in Taiwan. When we were working on the 26 measures, we talked to Taiwanese business people and listened to their appeals. We tested some of the measures in pilot projects and then applied them comprehensively. Some of the measures allow Taiwanese business people to participate in some emerging industries they are specifically interested in. Whether the measures are gestures or breakthroughs, we will let the results do the talking.
That, of course, is a spokeswoman coming from the Taiwan Affairs Office from the State Council from China. Now, Ms. Lei, the thing is, the Taiwan Authority right now could well use the administrative power it has still before the election to push forward what they call this quote-unquote anti-infiltration bill in order to block more interactions between the mainland and Taiwan, from business communities to the academic communities to the common exchanges between the two sides. Do people understand the real nature of this, Ms. Lei?
Well, certainly it is a possibility, but I think it's more a raise eyebrow kind of tactic because the Congress will be in recess by December 20th. However, the signal is really clear that the current DPP government will regard anyone who has dealings with mainland China as a potential threat or potential infiltrator. And that will send a chilling signal to anyone in mainland China, especially those ones who do not support the DPP government. So it is both a election tactic but also a longer-term strategic move, but I think it will backfire DPP because the relationship across Taiwan Straits right now is extremely tight, and the people moving back and forth number to up to 2-3 million people. And if they do feel the threat from the current DPP government, that will backfire DPP.
If people has ever looked at history, now one of the fact is even for the direct flight between the mainland and Taiwan for the Spring Festival, which is the most important traditional festival for the Chinese community around the world, has been painstakingly taking so much effort in the history by two sides in order to be established so that people can really travel to see their families on both sides and be able to celebrate. Now, Mr. Gao, this is not just about that, it's also about business ties. So many Taiwan business people are working hard here on the mainland, having their operations here on the mainland and the other way around too. So what do you make of the potential that the upcoming election would put more pressure on the real exchanges between the two sides?
Well, overall and philosophically speaking, I'm very optimistic. Why? Because I think the 23 million people in Taiwan, as well as up to 1.4 billion people in mainland China, we all want to have peace and stability in the cross-strait relations. I don't think there are real people, either in mainland China or in Taiwan, who want to have a war against each other. I think President Xi Jinping said the right thing. Chinese do not need to fight against the Chinese anymore. And I think for Ms. Tsai Ing-wen or for DPP or for any political force in Taiwan, if they fight against the megatrend of greater and more improved relations between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, eventually they will alienate the people. Eventually they will be dumped by history. And I think this is a megatrend. Okay. Whoever who becomes the next local leader in Taiwan cannot really fight against the megatrend of more improved relations between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait.
I see. And final words very briefly from you as well, Ms. Lei.
Well, certainly I think in addition to the leadership election, there will be congressional seats. All 113 seats will be up for grabs. So in order for the cross-strait relations to go back to its normal track, which was between 2008 and 2016, the DPP will have to be ousted, and KMT has to win both the leadership election and the congressional election.
It's going to be a daunting task, I guess, for some of the political parties on the island. For now, I want to thank both of you for joining us for your insights.
Only a swing of 20 seats.
Thank you.
Now, thank you so much, Gao Zhikai and also Joanna Lei. Really appreciate it. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our live program. The World Trade Organization in limbo, some say. Former WTO chief Pascal Lamy weighs in on how to keep the multilateral trading system alive after the appellate body paralyzed. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. A key arbiter in global trade has been plunged into crisis. The World Trade Organization's appellate body, as of Wednesday, will be unable to make rulings on appeals made by members. The head of the WTO had this to say about it.
Can we find a solution for the long term? How fast can we do that? What would that solution be? I mean, there are a number of questions there, but it just simply just doesn't mean that it's over. It simply means that, as far as I can tell, it's going to be different.
As a WTO dispute settlement body, the appellate body has 7 judges. According to WTO regulations, at least 3 members are needed to hear an appeal. Starting from Wednesday, there will be only 1 judge left, preventing the appellate body from reviewing new disputes. The U.S. has been blocking the reappointment of the WTO's appeals judges since 2017. And on Monday, the U.S. did not approve the draft decision to reform the appellate body at the meeting of the WTO's General Council. Jiang Xiangchen, China's ambassador to the WTO, said is delivering what is no doubt the most severe blow to the multilateral trading system since its establishment. Meanwhile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry also said that China will continue to make consistent efforts to safeguard the multilateral trading system.
The dispute settlement mechanism is the jewel in the WTO's crown. It is critical for the WTO to perform its functions. The continuous obstruction from the U.S. in the selection of judges for the appellate body will affect the normal functioning of the dispute settlement mechanism. China is working with the overwhelming majority of the WTO members on a solution to maintain the functions of the dispute settlement mechanism, so as to protect the authority and effectiveness of the WTO.
About the future of WTO, earlier I sat down with Pascal Lamy, the former WTO Director General, to talk about WTO reforms and U.S.-China trade relations. He said the world should not let the U.S. hold the other 75% of the global economy hostage. And maybe one day the WTO reforms need to move on without even the United States. Let's listen in as to what he had to say. So you're seeing everything, all the balls are in the court of the U.S. As long as they are willing to kick, there could be something. But if they're not, we are likely to face very different situation. Now, what is that situation? I mean, I'm talking about the latter option.
If the U.S. do not want to move, the rest of the WTO membership, maybe not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, will have to move without the U.S.
You think that can be done?
We cannot accept that 25% of the world economy takes 75% of the world economy hostage. This is not admissible. Lots of countries on this planet need a predictable, stable, rules-based trading system. This is a major public good. We cannot accept that this major public good is destroyed unilaterally by the United States of America if this is their intention. Again, at this stage, it is not clear. So we have to brace for 2 possible scenarios. One where the U.S. remain within the tent and accept a deal where they will have to make concessions and others will have to make concessions, or they don't accept this, and then we have to think, at least, of a plan B, which is a WTO which would work without US support.
But is there a deadline that people can look at? I mean, if there's a waiting process, the wait can be short, the wait can be long. Since the Second World War, the international system has been established with the United States being one of the most important leaders in the system. Now, the U.S. is reluctant to follow the path it originally chose, and the rest of the world is pondering about, now, what would be the order of the rest of us?
The answer to your question is extremely clear. The rest of the world need, at some stage, to create a vision that does not leave the World Trade Organization a hostage in the hands of the United States of America.
Can you tell me more about that vision, in your word, quote unquote? What is making of this vision? WTO may be one thing. What about the other factors?
Of course, WTO and trade and investment are only one of the major dimensions of a geopolitical, much larger and much longer rivalry between the US and China. We all know that. Trade is one bit of this very complex relationship. The problem being that it's extremely important for many people on this planet because trade is the way you grow your economies. And growing your economies is increasing people's revenues and standard of living. So this is why it is a major issue. Not that the rest does not matter, but for most of the people, if the US succeed in destabilizing and damaging WTO, this will have a huge cost for many people on this planet, which is why this cannot be accepted. I think most countries realize this. They simply sometimes are under US pressure, which is why only big elephants can stabilize the situation. We know the three big elephants in world trade: US, China, Europe. If the three elephants cannot agree, if one of the elephants is trying to damage the system, the two other elephants, i.e. EU and China, need to coalesce in order to stabilize the system. This does not mean that they will not have to move. China will have to move on subsidization of its economy. Europe might have to move on farm subsidies, like US, by the way. That's a matter for a negotiation, not just arms twisting, brutality, and hostage taking.
Any hope, first phase, so-called China-US trade deal?
That's what everybody expects.
Really?
Not least because I think the US president has now understood that trade wars are not that easy to win. So I personally expect some sort of deal. They will call it first phase. I'm not sure there will ever be a second phase.
Why not?
Because I think the problem that needs to be addressed does not have to do with a bilateral negotiation between US and China. We have a series of problems in WTO which necessitate a rediscussion of a number of WTO rules. This is not a matter for a bilateral deal. This is a matter for a multilateral deal. What can be addressed bilaterally is a bit of this, a bit of that. Frankly speaking, nothing that is to the right dimension of the problems we have to address: subsidies, digital trade, trade and environment, fishery subsidies. All these are multilateral, not bilateral issues.
Well, the first phase, if there were any, before the end of the year, if there is any possibility about that, paved the way for some kinds of cordial atmosphere for the WTO eventually to handle that, let's just say, during the ministers' meeting next year?
Maybe depends on the U.S. willingness to work in the World Trade Organization.
What's your reading of the willingness?
With EU, with China, with Africa, with Brazil, with India, to reform a number of areas where the WTO rulebook needs reform. Whether the U.S. are ready to do that or not, at this stage is very unclear, as, for instance, shown by their position on the dispute settlement system in the WTO, which they are simply blocking without any clear indication of what do they expect from this hostage-taking.
So to you, Mr. Lamy, where is the starting point? It seems like there is so many things entangled with one another. Where is the starting point? Is the starting point likely to work?
Depends whether or not this big US-China rivalry can be trade-wise stabilized by the European Union and other countries that have to stand in between US and China.
Do you see there is willingness from the other parties that you just mentioned, EU included, to work on this, or they are standing by to see what's likely to be the end result?
I think as far as the EU is concerned, we are trying, they are trying to mediate between US and China. The EU strategy is to help with US putting pressure on China and help with China putting pressure on the US. This needs to be done. In any reform of the WTO, EU, China, US will have to make concessions. We all will have to accept that the rules cannot be changed just in one direction or on one issue. This is called a multilateral negotiation. The question with the US is whether or not they accept that these issues have to be dealt with, first and foremost, in a multilateral way and not in a bilateral way. This is a question of doctrine. The US doctrine for the moment is extremely unclear.
You talk about the so-called three kingdom or three-factor theories recently. One of the things you mentioned, Mr. Lamy, is about the digital economy, particularly the use of data. Now, you talk about the different roles that governments, whether in the three places, China, EU, and the United States, see the significance of data. So how do you see the so-called three kingdom, in your words, will be able to come together, or there's likely to be the struggling romance of the three kingdoms, as there was an ancient novel in China called the Three Kingdoms?
No, I think you're absolutely right in the way you describe the situation. One, data is the raw material of the economy of tomorrow and partly of today. So we need as many data as possible in order to feed new digital systems like artificial intelligence, like Internet of Things. So there is a huge wealth in a zillion of data appearing as it does. The problem being, of course, that the underlying philosophy about humans' relationship with data is different in each of the three kingdoms. As you rightly said, for US it's a merchandise.
What you said.
For Europe it's individual property, and for China it has to be accessible to the state. So my view is that these three systems will not converge. But we have to organize the coexistence of three different systems. After all, we have many differences. We don't need to harmonize everything. What will need to be done, whether it's the World Trade Organization or whether it's elsewhere, is the interface between these three systems. I'm told by technicians, for instance, that blockchain might help connecting systems which remain different in terms of localization, accessibility, privacy of data.
Mr. Lamy, you've been working in the international system for long, so you know very well about the debate as to what will be the nature of leadership in this regard. A lot of people talk about governance, for example, in the China case. A lot of people also talk about stakeholders. For example, the World Economic Forum recently has been readopting this phrase. And others talk about who will be the important players when you debate about all of these important issues and who will lead the debate. What is the most important factor here, or the things that people can get hold of to begin with?
Global governance left in the hands of sovereigns, diplomats, treaties, institutions, has obvious limits. We cannot just rely on sovereigns having the monopoly of international relations. We need to involve different stakeholders, civil society organizations, businesses, big academic institutions, major cities, which are not sovereign, into addressing issues having to do with environment, with technology, with social inclusion, with culture. It is what I have called in the past polylateralism as opposed to traditional multilateralism. Of course, states matter, sovereign matters, but they have to be complemented, supplemented by other approach, because the energy you tap in real people, not just officials, is sometimes much bigger, and their level and their capacity to commit, to coalesce, to get things done is much bigger than between traditional sovereigns.
You experienced the thrive of technology, for example, the internet, the application of internet, during your term as the Secretary General of the WTO. You also experienced the trade fights among some of the major players at various times of your career with WTO. Is there anything that we can learn from those periods of times?
Of course. Sure.
What are the biggest takeaways that you had since then?
The biggest takeaway, in a sense, is very simple. Trade opening works for welfare under some conditions, which are A, leveling the playing field, B, protecting domestic stakeholders who are the losers of trade opening. Trade opening is efficient. It's painful for some. There are winners and losers. The fact that there are many more winners than losers does not change the fact that losers have to be taken care of. So it's relatively simple. At global level, you need to level the playing field as much as you can in reducing obstacles to trade so that people can trade fairly. And domestically, you need the sort of welfare, social security system that allow to retrain, refit people who are victims from an increase of competition among economies. Again, efficient and painful, painful and efficient. This is the basic equation of global market capitalism. Whether we like it or not, this can be done. In some periods, the WTO rules have been moving forward. Some countries, and notably in Europe, have found the right way to address the pain of some social hardship stemming from more competition. It's not always been the case, but the example of the last 30 years show that it is doable.
From now until the end of next year, a lot of things could happen, including the ministers' meeting of WTO, including the U.S. election as well. Are we going to see worse before anything can happen? Should we be prepared for next year, Mr. Lamy?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe that we've reached a stage of globalization, of interconnection of our production systems of goods, services, circulation of people, capital, that make deglobalization, if this is Mr. Trump's target, that make deglobalization extremely unlikely.
That's my interview with Pascal Lamy, the former WTO Director General. Tomorrow, we will continue to bring you our special program on the WTO, in which I will talk to Zhang Yuejiao, a former judge of the WTO appellate body. And that is all the time we have for today. Do follow us on Twitter and Facebook. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.